Well, the synod hasn't even started yet, and already the door to blessing gay couples just got opened. Wow. Join us with the latest from the Eternal City, Church Milton's Rome correspondent, Dr. Jules Gomes. Jules, yesterday, just as we were going on air, the response to the original dubia drafted back in July to by the five cardinals, Burke, Sarah, and company, was published by the Vatican, so we weren't able to cover it at that time. But boy, is it packed. Let's start with the Vatican's response to the cardinals' question on blessing same-sex unions. What's it saying, and what does it mean?
Brad, this is a landmark. It's historic. It's a watershed moment in the history of the Catholic Church, because for the first time in 2,000 years, a sitting pope has actually said that a priest will be free to bless same-sex unions. And what he's done is he said that they ought to use their own judgment and discernment. And the two buzz phrases in this response to the cardinal's dubia are pastoral prudence and pastoral charity. Pope Francis categorically says we cannot be judges who only deny, reject, and exclude homosexual people, obviously, and therefore offering them blessings would be one way of including them. He does, however, make it very clear that in no way a liturgy of blessings can simulate or imitate the rite of holy matrimony. He has very high praise for the sacrament of holy matrimony. He says it is exclusively between one man and one woman, and it is for the sake of procreation.
So the text coming from the Dicastery, the Doctrine of the Faith, with Pope's signature on it, it says, quote, pastoral prudence must adequately discern whether there are forms of blessing requested by one or more persons that do not transmit a mistaken conception of marriage. Now that came across to me like kind of like asking a pastor if he can discern a way of squaring a circle without confusing squares with circles. You know, how do you think that discernment process will go with shepherds like Cardinal Burke or Cardinal Sarah or other clerics formed, you know, like-minded clerics?
People like Cardinal Burke and Cardinal Sarah and Cardinal Walter Brandmüller and, of course, Cardinal Zen, who have drafted this dubia, will very clearly see through the sophistry and the doublespeak, because there's already a massive, war on social media over how to interpret the Pope's statements. And Pope-splainers, on the one hand, are trying to give Pope Francis the benefit of the doubt. But, anyone who has seen the trajectory of every single Protestant denomination that has gone down this route will know that this is how it started. And this was predicted, by the way, in 2014, that it would happen in the Catholic Church. And now Cardinal Burke and his fellow cardinals are not so naive. They know when the wool is being pulled over their eyes. They can see through the sophistry and the doublespeak. And they know that this is a Trojan horse. I mean, more than a Trojan horse, quite honestly. It's quite blatantly an attempt to open the door for blessing same-sex unions, something that has already been happening over the last few years in Germany, Switzerland, Belgium, and has received absolutely no censure from Pope Francis or the hierarchy in the Vatican.
The Vatican hasn't been enforcing what came out of the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith back in 2021 when it says God can't bless sin. They haven't been enforcing that now, and it seems like this is just going to give them more cover not to enforce the traditional pastoral practice of not blessing same-sex unions. But Jules, you mentioned on social media there's a Father Stephen Imperato out there that he said if a couple asks for a blessing, he would give them a silent blessing, praying a chastity, obedience prayer over them. So even though a good priest might take that route, how do you see other priests, like, in Belgium and Germany, and bishops acting, now that they have a green light to actually call down God's blessing on the sinful union itself?
Well, that is problematic because if a priest says he's going to give a person, a couple, a silent blessing, the gay couple do not know what is in the priest's mind. And they are very likely to conclude, they are most likely to conclude actually, that the priest is endorsing their sexual union. So the most prudent way, the most Christian way, the most biblical way would be to have nothing to do with the sinful act and to distance oneself and state very clearly that the couple is living in sin. I mean, one would do that if somebody from your congregation left his wife and ran away with another woman and then came to you and said, Father, please bless our relationship. Would the priest be right in saying, okay, I'll give you a silent blessing? That doesn't seem, to go along with what the liturgy of a blessing is all about. And very clearly, countries like bishops' conferences, like the Flemish bishops, have actually drafted a liturgy for same-sex blessings, and this is what is going to happen. This is what pastors will be expected to use. Now, I was talking to Catholics in England, where what is happening is because the Church of England has green-lighted same-sex blessings officially, but they have given priests the freedom to say to congregations, well, this is not, my conscience does not permit me to do this. They can do the same with remarrying divorced couples, by the way. And however, this immediately becomes an opportunity for the person, the couple, the gay couple, to rush to the media and say, look, I went to Father XYZ, and he has refused to bless my same-sex union. When Pope Francis, his boss, has so clearly said that he should exercise mercy and generosity and not judge me, not deny me, reject me, and exclude me. So you can see what a can of worms Pope Francis has opened.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he really made a mess on this one, but he still leaves it up to the discernment. It was so much like Amoris Laetitia about communion to divorce and civilly remarried that many bishops discerned that you can't do that. Many bishops discerned you can give communion to people in adulterous unions. Another door that got opened by the DDF's response to the 5 cardinals was on discussing or, quote, studying the ordination of women. Tell us about that.
Well, you're right to, emphasize the word study, because again, that is code for this is a matter that isn't closed. We can reopen it, and study is basically a code word for throwing it open for debate. Now, Pope Francis does say that, acknowledge that Pope John Paul II barred the ordination of women in his apostolic letter Ordinatio Sacerdotalis. However, Pope Francis then goes on to say something very interesting. He says, so far, there has been no definitive doctrinal pronouncement on what an authoritative and definitive Catholic teaching is. Obviously, by this, he doesn't mean an infallible statement, because that has been clearly defined. But Pope Francis is, pointing to a significant loophole here. And my guess is that I'm almost certain the ghostwriter of this document, it's very clear that Pope Francis has not written this responsum ad dubium or responsum ad dubia. That it's somebody in the DDF, and it does look almost certain that Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez has a secondary hand on it, doing minor amendments here and there. He also brings up the issue of Anglican orders, and as we know, Anglican orders were declared null and void by Pope Leo XIII in Apostolicae Curiae. And again, he puts this along with women's ordination and says that these issues ought to be studied.
Yeah, and then he says no one can publicly contradict it, and yet it can be the subject of study. So it seems like in one sense he's holding the line, and in another sense he's opening the door. Now, shifting gears here for a minute, another dubia, completely separate from the 5 cardinals dubia, another one came in from a retired archbishop from Czechoslovakia. This one dredges up the topic of giving communion to the divorced Catholics who have civilly remarried. Can you tell us about that?
Well, again, very interesting. This is a retired cardinal, like all the others, and Cardinal Duka is Archbishop Emeritus of Prague, and he sent a set of 10 dubia to the Vatican, to the congregation, the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith. And the response in one sentence basically has been a resounding affirmation of Pope Francis's apostolic exhortation, Amoris Laetitia, telling Cardinal Duka if a couple or people living in what we would call adulterous unions, people who have divorced and who are civilly remarried without an annulment from the church, Catholics without an annulment from the church, if they are living together, and if Pope John Paul II had said they ought to live like sister and brother, Pope Francis has now discerned that in some cases this may not be possible. It may not be advisable. And so we leave it to their individual consciences, accompanied by a pastor and before God, to discern and make up their minds themselves whether they should come forward for Holy Communion or no. And if they do decide, we do not bar them from the Holy Sacrament.
You know, it's like a shepherd. You have sheep on the cliff, and the sheep want to discern that they should jump off the cliff. You'd think the shepherd would pull them back, and here it's like, well, we need to let them judge for themselves whether they want to jump off the cliff or not. It doesn't seem very pastoral. Now, finally, Jules, we've covered this question heavily after the 2015 Synod on the Family and in the wake of the apostolic exhortation on that Synod, Amoris Laetitia, as you brought up. When they were asked to discern whether communion could be given to such couples living in irregular unions, many bishops said yes, many others discerned the answer was still no, and will always be no. Do you see that conflict flaring up again with this latest response?
Brad, I have been predicting and saying this over and over again. What Francis is aiming for is an Anglican or Lutheran-styled federation of churches where each conference of bishops will be free to discern in the light of their cultural context rather than in the light of universal Catholic and perennial Catholic teaching what they can approve and what they cannot. So if polygamy, polygamous unions are being talked about in the Synod on Synodality. If in the African context, polygamous unions are culturally okay, those bishops are free to approve them. But as we know, in the African context, homosexuality is absolutely taboo. And so the African bishops can then say no to homosexuality, whereas in Germany, where polygamy may be taboo and homosexuals unions are very much culturally acceptable, the German bishops may decide to approve homosexual relationships and offer blessings. So this is, this marks the balkanization of Catholic Christianity, as it were. But again, the whole synodal exercise is an experiment in that direction.
I kind of liked it when it was more simple. Everybody had the same playbook. And, folks were really worried about things getting dicey at the Synod. It turned out we didn't have to wait that long. Church teaching hasn't officially changed, but pastoral practice sure got a kick in the pants. Stay tuned to Rome Dispatch. Our goal is to keep you from abandoning ship, because this ship came without lifeboats. Jules, thank you so much for your report and your sober analysis.
Thank you, Brad.
Thanks again for watching today's episode of Rome Dispatch. This show is brought to you by donors like Real Estate for Life. If you're looking to buy or sell a home and want to support our mission, visit realestateforlife.org. Again, that's realestateforlife.org. Be sure to tell them Church Militant sent you. God bless.